Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Marco's Pizza. You have picked a great day to be with us. We've got a lot of recruiting information to get into over the course of our time together. We'll also do some of the stuff with the team as well, heading towards the Sugar Bowl. Mike Griffith is going to be with us a little bit later on. But off the top, we're going to deal with a lot of information involving five-star running back Trey Sanders, five-star wide receiver Jayden Hazelwood. We'll try to do our part to figure out where both those guys are going, although I guess good luck trying to decipher those clues at the moment. But we'll do our part nonetheless. It's going to be a really fun show. We're really glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
The build-up to National Signing Day is intense. We knew it would be. We're going to do our part to cover it all over the course of the next few minutes here, and we're glad to have you on the program today. Jayden Hazelwood coming up. After all, I think that some of y'all would just probably drive off the road if I didn't at least mention Jayden Hazelwood for a few minutes in every show. I know you got to fill out your DawgNation Daily bingo card, so we'll do our Jayden Hazelwood talk in just a minute so you can fill in that square on your game card. But before we get to Jayden Hazelwood, I want to start with another five-star prospect who's potentially on the board for Georgia here heading towards December 19th and the beginning of the early signing period for the 2019 class. I want to talk about five-star running back Trey Sanders. And I guess we've mentioned Sanders now in a few straight shows as well. Talked about him yesterday, talked about him going back to Friday. Sanders has been on our mind a lot as of late, and as a way of furthering that conversation today, I'm going to do something pretty dangerous. I'm going to attempt to decipher Instagram. Now, I am 41 going on 95. Like, I am like the oldest 41-year-old in the world. I don't always read the Instagram stuff as well. It's a little bit like deciphering hieroglyphics for me, but there was an image that did catch my attention of Trey Sanders on Instagram. If you're watching on video, I'll show this to you. If you're listening, I'll do my part to try to explain this. This is an Instagram story. All right, so let me see if I can get some help with this. So this is a question that someone asked Trey Sanders on Instagram, and he basically threw that on there. This is him just sort of creating this on his own. All right, so one way or another, this is him creating on his own. It says it's Sanders wearing his Georgia jersey, going back to his visit over the weekend. It says, ask some questions. Will Trey Sanders be in a Georgia unit next year? I'm assuming unit means uniform. Will he be in a Georgia unit next year? And then down at the bottom of this image on Instagram, it says, I think so. So Trey Sanders kind of throwing out there for Georgia on Instagram. And obviously, this is like, the sort of second consecutive day that we've seen some of this stuff from Sanders on social media as of late, kind of talking about Georgia, kind of showing some love there when it comes to this kind of stuff. And as Jeff Sintel has explained in the past, that even though Georgia spent a lot of time recruiting a guy like John Emery Jr., and even though Georgia spent a lot of time, maybe not being publicly connected to Sanders, there are some reasons why Sanders might indeed be in Georgia's plans and why Georgia might indeed be in Sanders' plans. Let me let you hear a little bit of Jeff Sintel once again as a reminder of maybe why this relationship is blossoming here late in the process. Here is Jeff Sintel on Trey Sanders.
I've kind of always felt that Sanders was going to end up at either Georgia or Alabama. It's just the running back pedigree, the line, he gets all that. He was very comfy and cozy at G-Day with a lot of other folks. Here's where I think things got off track with Georgia, is when Georgia took John Emery, he started looking elsewhere. Now there's the moments here that are showing up where, Elijah Holyfield, is he likely to go pro? What about Brian Herrion? Then all of a sudden, Trey Sanders sees that Georgia is not betrothed to anybody yet, especially not an elite back. And that gets Georgia more interesting.
So Jeff says the absence of a couple running backs from this year's roster, potentially the 2018, or I should say the 2019 roster, could make an impact for Georgia there. But that's not the only reason Jeff thinks, and by the way, we'll hear more from Jeff Sintel later on today on Before the Hedges, but that's not the only reason why Jeff Sintel thinks that Trey Sanders could be attracted to UGA. Here's another reminder from Jeff about what all of this could be about.
Mike Locksley was the lead recruiter on both Evan Neal and Trey Sanders. Of course, Locksley's now on his way to Maryland, and I think that also opens up a lot of things.
So Mike Locksley, now the Maryland head coach, was the Alabama offensive coordinator. That's a guy that was recruiting Trey Sanders hard. Him not being there anymore maybe makes Jeff Sentell think that Trey Sanders may take a second look, a more critical look at Alabama, and all of a sudden not be quite as attracted to the Crimson Tide. And it's also worth pointing out that Florida is in the mix here too. Sanders is expected to be at Florida this weekend, but I think most Georgia fans would say when it comes to being fearful of a competitor, more reason to be feeling that way about Alabama than Florida. No disrespect, but let's face it, Georgia fans think they can win head-to-head recruiting battles against Dan Mullen and the Gators. But as far as the Alabama part of this goes, one more reason why Jeff Sentell thinks there's at least a chance that Trey Sanders may not be quite as attracted to the Crimson Tide as he was once believed to be. Here's Jeff Sentell again.
Alabama, I don't know if you noticed or not, but they kind of win games right now more throwing the ball around to Tua Tagovailoa and his five-star magic show of five-star receivers. Alabama's probably not seen as the place to run the rock and to enhance your stock for the NFL as it used to be.
So quick recap here. You got five-star running back Trey Sanders on the board as an uncommitted prospect, likely choosing between Georgia, where he just visited, Florida, where he's going to visit this weekend, but Alabama has been thought to be the favorite there for a while. But the guy that was recruiting Alabama is no longer there. Alabama's a little bit more of a pass-happy offense as of late, and Georgia has proven itself to once again be a great springboard for running backs. Just look at the success that Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift enjoyed this past season. And, oh yeah, by the way, there's a possibility that some playing time opens up at Georgia, at least based on the chances that Elijah Holyfield could at least consider the NFL. Those are the reasons why Georgia fans are getting a little more optimistic here. Now, to add to all of this, Nick Saban has been recently seen on the recruiting trail recruiting another running back. DeAndre Glass is a running back out of Katy, Texas, nowhere near a prospect of the caliber of Trey Sanders, a good player, but not the same caliber prospect. And DeAndre Glass recently tweets out a picture of himself standing there with Nick Saban. Had a great visit today with Coach Saban. DeAndre Glass says, "Roll Tide." So obviously people who follow recruiting closely say, well, if Alabama thought it wasn't going to get Trey Sanders, that's exactly what they would be doing. Nick Saban would be going out visiting with another running back. It's also worth pointing out that Georgia has spent some time with a lot of running backs itself as well over the course of the last few weeks, so sometimes that kind of stuff can be false positives. I guess to wrap up all of this portion of the conversation, though, there's an element of me that was a little more excited about Sanders before he started showing all this social media love. What's the line from Shakespeare about thou dost protesteth a bit too much? Whatever the opposite of that is, I feel like this may be going on with Sanders. This is almost a little too much love for Georgia. We do see a degree of trolling from time to time in social media. I think it's good-natured. I don't think recruits mean anything ill will by it all. I just think that's their way of having fun and their way of sort of being fascinated by the attention their messages generate. There's an element of this for me that almost feels like it's going too far in the direction of showing the Georgia love, and maybe there's a swerve coming at the other end. I don't know. I do know this is a player that Georgia really needs. It'd be a great way to take a player from Alabama and add to Georgia's impressive haul here for 2019. This is like a lot of those five-star names that are still on the board, though. There is a lot left to be decided on this, and we will just have to wait and see, but it's at least interesting that Trey Sanders has had Georgia on his mind so much on social media as of late. Let me transition, though, and talk about another five-star prospect. That's Jayden Hazelwood, a guy that we have talked about a lot and was a part of a thrilling moment yesterday in Mercedes-Benz Stadium as his Cedar Grove team beat a very good Peach County team in the state championship game and did so in thrilling fashion. Once again, if you're watching on video, and I don't typically like to do things that only translate on video, but I do want to give you a chance to see the game-winning touchdown that Jayden Hazelwood caught yesterday as captured by our buddy Jeff Sentell, who was there in the building, and Connor Riley, I guess, they're working on this as well. Actually, Connor, did you shoot this or did Jeff? Yeah, Connor Riley shot this. So take a look at this on video, and I'll kind of describe it for you. As Hazelwood there with the game on the line gets a chance to beat single coverage, come away with the touchdown pass, and putting the Saints in the win column for state championship game. An incredible moment for him, catching that touchdown, and then really putting this game on the map in terms of one of the best games of the season, one of the great moments there for a Cedar Grove team beating Peach County which has been a dominant program, just a terrific moment. Then after that, Hazelwood kind of discusses his top 5 a little bit. Now, if you'd been watching the game, you also saw some of that too from him with those logos all over his shoe. He would then tweet about that later on, talking about those top 5 schools that do include Georgia and a lot of those other schools that we've kind of mentioned from time to time. Oklahoma, where he visited last spring, Florida State, which we've discussed as of late, Miami, of course, and then the University of Tennessee. There has been a lot of that lately when it comes to Hazelwood for all those schools, and those now do officially become his top 5. And for some Georgia fans, this part of the discussion kind of veers back in that territory of excessively dramatic, a little more than some Georgia fans want. But when you see Hazelwood do what he does in terms of that state championship there, you really understand, why this is a guy that gets as much attention as he does. He is clearly a player that is worth the hype and is worthy of that attention. There's no doubt about that. And obviously a lot of Georgia fans are plugged in and watching closely to see if Hazelwood indeed is going to choose Georgia when he makes his announcement there in early January at the All-Star game, kind of post-early signing day. That's certainly going to be something very interesting to see. We'll obviously talk to Jeff Sintel more about this later on, but it is important to remember, kind of where this process has been for Jayden Hazelwood. I mean, he's discussed this a lot as of late. Georgia there among his top 5. Obviously, Dog fans hope that they do get the nod. Here is what he said most recently about Georgia when he spoke to our Jeff Sintel back in November. Here's Hazelwood again on the Georgia offense and the evolution that it showed over the last part of the 2018 regular season.
Have you been paying attention to the state school throwing the ball around a little more? How do you feel about what Georgia's doing? How do you feel about that fit right
they've been throwing it a little bit more. I ain't really been watching them, but I've been seeing stuff on Twitter, so that's really it.
What about Justin? Did you see his highlights?
He threw a bomb to Miko, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that.
What's left for you and them? What do you need to see? Like if you were going to take the official this weekend, what would that have done for you?
I just want to see how everybody getting used. Everybody got a way of being used, so I'm trying to compare myself to see what they have and see how he's getting used.
The bomb to Miko that he's referencing there was the UMass game that Justin Fields threw the pass to McCall Hardman. And obviously, it's easy to understand that Hazelwood wants to be at a place that's going to really use him. And maybe the passing attack he saw from Georgia over the last few weeks of the season will give him, that inclination about UGA. I think, though, that when you see the shoes in the top 5, I think it's easy to believe what Hazelwood also told Jeff Sintel a couple weeks ago, that as it stands right now, he really does not know what it is that he wants to do with his final college decision. Here is Hazelwood emphasizing that point once again.
Question everybody wants to know. Describe where you're at. Just what do you think? Is this
clueless right now?
Clueless, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it becomes very easy to believe Hazelwood when he says that, and this is going to be a fun story to watch the rest of the way. The Trey Sanders story going to be a fun story to watch the rest of the way. Nakobe Dean, some of these other uncommitted 5-stars. As I've been saying, let's just get buckled up here for a wild ride. Georgia trying to build another elite class, and some of these remaining uncommitted 5-star names will really hold the key to just how successful this signing day turns out to be for UGA. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hello to you. Thank you for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed. We're also on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref and in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found. It's all brought to you by Marco's Pizza. And you know at Marco's, Primo is always on the menu. It's dough made fresh. It's a sauce from the original Gianmarco family recipe, and it's 3 signature cheeses on every pizza. You can order yours today from Marcos.com. We really appreciate Marco's Pizza being a part of our program here today. We also appreciate our buddy Mike Griffith from DawgNation being on the show today, too. We'll get him coming up in a couple of minutes. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse, presented here on this Wednesday by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I actually want to turn my attention away from recruiting here for a couple of minutes because I thought there was something really interesting at usatoday.com the other day. Paul Meyerberg, longtime college football writer there for USA Today, was looking at his Heisman favorites for 2019. I'm going to talk to Mike Griffith about this in just a moment, but I wanted to spend some time with it on around the doghouse before we got to that. Meyerberg was looking at his top 10 Heisman candidates for 2019, and as you might imagine, Georgia's represented on this list, but not specifically. The entity that gets mentioned from Georgia as a Heisman candidate for next season, he just simply put Georgia's starting quarterback. didn't specify between Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. Let me show you the quote here from Paul Meyerberg explaining why he doesn't specify between Fromm and Fields. He says, maybe it's a cop-out not to go ahead and slot Jake Fromm in, who was wildly overshadowed by Tua Tagovailoa and Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins during a regular season that was a strong follow-up to his successful freshman campaign. But Paul Meyerberg says you never know. Georgia could flip its offensive mindset and go with a sophomore-to-be Justin Fields in an effort to be a more dynamic offense under center. Meyerberg then says, either way, Georgia's starting quarterback is going to be in the thick of the Heisman conversation. I don't disagree with that last sentiment. I do believe that Georgia's quarterback in 2019 will be in the thick of the Heisman conversation. I guess where I am now, though, and what makes me different apparently than Paul Meyerberg, and I'll ask Mike Griffith about this in a moment. I'll give you a chance to weigh in on this today as well. I am no longer of the mindset that, hey, this is a quarterback job that's up for grabs in 2019. I think that Jake Fromm earned the starting job for next season with the way that he played against Alabama 2 Saturdays ago. And that doesn't mean that I don't want to see at times more of Justin Fields in more traditional roles next year than we saw in 2018, assuming that Fields chooses to stay. And I think there's a better chance than not that Fields will, despite the fact that Fields was non-committal with us about that a couple of weeks ago. But I think that Jake Fromm played maybe the best game he's ever played against the best defense he's ever seen. And what more would you need to see from him to validate his claim as being the Georgia starting quarterback? So as we head towards an offseason where we'll talk about this kind of stuff a lot, I'm prepared to talk about this moving forward with Fromm more solidly in control of this starting job than he's ever been before. I think his play spoke volumes with how he performed against Alabama the other day. And from that standpoint, I think that Paul Meyerberg gets it wrong when he doesn't specify between starting quarterbacks in his Heisman look ahead for 2019. Justin Fields, I think, is still a dazzling prospect. He's going to have a very good career at Georgia. But for next season, the starting job, I think more solidly than ever, belongs to a Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. All right, it's Around the Doghouse, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You know what they do. They provide foundation repair, basement waterproofing, and crawl space encapsulation. They also offer a lifetime of support. So check them out by giving them a call at 678-ESOG-NOW. That number, once again, 678-ESOG-NOW, and have one of their qualified professional technicians come over to your home and check your cracked foundation or your wet basement or your damp crawl space. It's the only foundation repair company that DawgNation would trust because it's the only one with a full-time engineer on staff. So give them a call at 678-ESOG-NOW. All right, great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and hope you enjoy Mike Griffith right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring in our buddy Mike Griffith here onto the conversation here on DawgNation Daily. Mike, first of all, really appreciate you being with us. And just before you joined us, I was talking about something that Paul Meyerberg wrote at usatoday.com, and he was looking at his 10 Heisman Trophy favorites for 2019. And for Georgia, Mike, Paul mentions only the Georgia starting quarterback. He kind of, doesn't separate from Fields, doesn't distinguish one over the other, basically leaving the door open that Fields may beat out Jake Fromm. And while I guess you'd never say never about anything, my point here is when you look at the way that Jake played against Alabama in the SEC championship, I think that Fromm made a real statement about his skills, his performance, and I think that he starts 2019 more solidly in control of the starting quarterback job than he probably started 2018 with, just given the fact that he played his best against the best defense that he's seen. Where do you land on that conversation?
So I think right now that's logical. I mean, based on what we saw against Alabama, I mean, it all makes sense to me, BA. But I guess I would say let's see what happens in the Sugar Bowl. And if I had to put my money on anybody, I would put it on DeAndre Swift. To me, DeAndre was playing as good as anybody in the country the last month of the season, and he told us he wasn't completely healthy. So even after the bye week. So let's just imagine DeAndre Swift being even better next year. I think the offensive line will be better. I think the passing game will be better. I think DeAndre Swift is probably my best bet for a Georgia Heisman winner. But to your point, I agree. Here's the problem. Perception overtakes reality. And college football has rejected Georgia and has a serious case of SEC fatigue. It's as simple as that. For this committee to overlook an Oklahoma team that finished the regular season last in their league in defense, and put them in ahead of Georgia. That was one clue. But then for Tua not to win the Heisman Trophy and for people to overlook an entire season's worth of work and what was the most prolific quarterback in Alabama history on the most dominant team in SEC history, and to overlook that for a PlayStation offense that managed only 3 touchdowns in regulation against Army, that tells me that it's the what have you done for me now society. So while you and I can sit here and digest what Jake did, certainly an all-SEC year if I ever saw one, and yet there was only one Georgia player that made the AP first-team All-SEC. But to the point, people aren't ready for Georgia. People are tired of the SEC. So they can put whoever they want from Georgia or whoever they want from the SEC, but if a team doesn't go through the season and slam dunk win it, if a guy like Tua can get overlooked for the Heisman, if a team like Oklahoma can slip in the playoffs ahead of Georgia, I'm not ready to make any assumptions at this point.
Well, I think you bring up some interesting points, and let me try to separate a couple issues here. First of all, you talk about, and true, like Heisman, candidacy type stuff. I do think you're right. There's a chance that DeAndre Swift emerges as Georgia's true Heisman candidate for 2019. But I was more looking at the Heisman candidacy piece from USA Today as a window into the national view in the Georgia starting quarterback position. And regardless of whether or not Fromm becomes a true Heisman candidate next season or not, I do think he is more solidly Georgia's starting quarterback now than he was a few weeks ago or certainly a couple of months ago. Do you agree with that part, that against Alabama, Fromm proved that he is the Georgia starting quarterback regardless of Justin Fields' status?
I thought he proved it last year, Brandon. I thought winning that shootout against Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma and coming from behind against Notre Dame and doing all that as a true freshman, and I thought he proved it all year, and I thought he proved it last year. But the reality, I think, is as long as Justin Fields is on this roster and as long as Kirby Smart is the head coach, he's going to leave every position open for competition. And I can't be a fortune teller and tell you what's going to happen in the Sugar Bowl. I think Georgia's going to play really well. I think Georgia's going to beat Texas. I think Jake Fromm will perform well. But Justin Fields has been making gains all year, and I don't know what he'll do with his opportunity. Hopefully we won't see him in the fake punt formation anytime soon. I don't know what he'll do under center. So while I would agree with you that as things stand right now, I'm not ready to make the leap to say what it's going to be like come September. There's a long time between now and then. Both of these quarterbacks are getting better, both of them. Jake got better this year. I thought Jake performed extremely well, as you pointed out, against Alabama. He looked great. But I can't tell you where Justin Fields is going to be after the spring session. Sure. He may pick things up quickly also.
Yeah, you may be right about that. I guess when you want to look ahead of the immediate future in the Sugar Bowl, I think it would be nonsensical, just to kind of follow up on this topic before we start transitioning and talking more fully about the Sugar Bowl. I think it would be nonsensical to see Fields play more against Texas, even though to a certain extent it's kind of a glorified exhibition, to see him play more against Texas than he has in other games this season, given the fact that Fromm did play so well against Alabama, and given the fact that by DeAndre Baker's decision to return, it seems like Georgia wants to take this game seriously. I mean, I think taking the game seriously means seeing the majority of the snaps given to Jake Fromm, given the momentum that he seems to have coming off the Alabama game. Where would you land on an idea like that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And I think this is more than an exhibition, okay? We've seen how this committee works. They're willing to use every little thing they can, okay? Kirby was right when he said it's going to be different every year. Nobody's bringing up the fact, by the way, that Georgia beat Oklahoma and Notre Dame last year. Nobody's bringing those games up. But, Brandon, I'll bet you anything that if Georgia were to slip up and lose this game against Texas, and we end up in this situation next year with 2 SEC games, people would point back and say, look right there.
Yeah.
Big 12 beat the SEC. They really weren't. Oklahoma beat Texas, but Georgia didn't. They will use this is where it's at. I'm telling you, I can see it. And USA Today does not speak for me. Nancy Armour is their columnist. She wrote that Jim Harbaugh owned college football 2 years ago. Embarrassing. Then she called out Urban Meyer as a bad person 2 weeks ago. I don't know if she's ever met the man. But that does not speak for me. Everybody has their own opinions. I respect them. I don't think they're going to speak for me or you. It's an interesting article, and they have quite a platform. But I don't lend a whole lot of stock necessarily to one organization these days. There's too many things. There's too many agendas out there, and what I'm seeing is an anti-SEC agenda right now, and SEC fatigue, and people are tired of it, and I get it. If television networks, look, you throw 2 SEC teams in there, you're losing a market. It comes down to dollars and cents. If you want to know the answer to some questions that don't make sense, follow the bouncing ball. It'll lead you to the almighty dollar.
Sure. And
right now, the SEC has gotten too big and too powerful, and college football risks losing the entire West Coast and west of the Mississippi. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into logic or rationale right now. I think people have agendas. I think Georgia needs to win this game, Brandon. I think this Sugar Bowl is the beginning of next season for Georgia.
Mike, I actually really like that talking point. I think that's a really interesting thing to say. And what it reminds me of is I'm a big golf fan. I don't know if you like golf or not, but in the PGA Tour, they have what's known as the wraparound season, so that the 2019 season actually begins before 2018 ends. The tournaments that take place right now are wraparound tournaments. And this is kind of your point about the Sugar Bowl, too. It's sort of the wraparound season for college football of, hey, the first game of the 2019 season is actually on January 1st to close at the 2018 season against Texas in the Sugar Bowl. Because I do think you make a lot of very valid points that no matter what the selection committee may say about, every year being its own entity and evaluated only within the framework of that year, perception is reality. And perception, to a large degree, is formed by a lot of what happens in games like this. So I actually really hope that Georgia approaches this game in a very similar fashion, the way that you just described it, as something that really sets the stage for a much bigger and better year for Georgia in 2019. I think that's a really fascinating point, Mike, and I'd really like to see Georgia kind of go out and demonstrate exactly that when it plays in New Orleans on January 1st.
Now, here's a quick history lesson, BA. 15 years ago, 14 years ago, an undefeated, it was very similar to where we're at right now, SEC fatigue. Undefeated Auburn in 2004. I don't know if you remember that team with Carmel Cadillac Williams and Ronnie Brown. They went undefeated, and they did not make the championship game. Oklahoma and USC were selected for that game. And one of the reasons for logic was that Auburn had lost at home to USC the year before. The other reason was schedule strength. Now, I do think Georgia, by playing Notre Dame next season, I don't think that schedule strength is going to be an issue. Now, there's some hidden stink bombs in next season, BA. I'm going to tell you. And when I wrote the story halfway through the year when the schedule was released, a lot of people rolled their eyes and shrugged their shoulders. But if I'm not mistaken, there's about 4 or 5 teams that have bye weeks before they play Georgia next year. And Georgia only has one situation like that, and that's against Florida, I believe. And Florida also has a bye week. Georgia has an extremely difficult schedule. But getting back to the point here, transitive properties are used, whether they will publicly state that or not, whether they're convenient or not, they are. It's in your mind, okay? We all remember the last time a team played a team. We all remember the last time Team A played Team B. It resonates with us. We remember, Georgia, Oklahoma, yeah, Georgia's better. They beat them last year, right? That's what we think. Why wouldn't they beat them again this year? Well, we won't find out because the committee, had their agenda, whatever. So I think this game is very important for Georgia because it could be another one-loss Georgia team we're talking about. We don't know the circumstances next year. I think next year's Georgia team could be the best in the SEC, certainly. If not Alabama, then Georgia. I think they could be in a very similar situation, only maybe have one loss. We could be having the same discussion, and it could be a one-loss Texas that just won the Big 12 against a one-loss Georgia that just lost to Alabama in the SEC title game. And you know darn well they will reflect back on this game. It will happen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, Mike. I think it's a really fascinating thing to think about, and I guess I would add to that the fact that DeAndre Baker is playing in the game. I do think that helps Georgia, and I've talked to Chip Towers about this. I've talked to everybody about this. Baker's decision, I think, really helps Georgia here. And, I don't know that I would fault him if he made a different decision. Obviously, business is business, and, certain players are going to make a different choice when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I am selfish. I do want what's best for Georgia, and I think Baker playing helps Georgia, not just because he's on the field, but because I think that he he really sets the pace for the focus of the rest of the roster as well. So if you and I are in agreement that Georgia's 2019 campaign is kind of kick-started by what happens in the Sugar Bowl, DeAndre Baker's presence there is pretty valuable, correct?
I absolutely agree with that, and I think it shows a lot of buy-in. I think it says a lot about Georgia and what they did for DeAndre Baker. He came there as a 3-star, and I think Kirby and Mel did a great job developing him. He's all in on the program. I think it says a lot about the buy-in that we've seen from Georgia all year. And I guess that's, people are asking me, wow, earlier this year, you were down on Jay. Well, earlier this year, they weren't playing as well as they were at the end of the year, BA, but I saw a team that was bought in every week. Every week these guys stay focused. We talked about it on the show. There weren't any off-the-field issues this year. That's not an accident, okay? That's guys policing themselves. That's guys putting the better of the team ahead of themselves. That's why they didn't make selfish, stupid decisions, because they all had a common goal that was bigger than the individual. That takes a huge amount of buy-in. It's very unique. It's really unfortunate that this team didn't get what I feel like they worked for under the criteria of being one of the 4 best. That bothers me, just like Tua not winning the Heisman bothers me, because I think that was wrong. I know what my eyes saw. I've been watching college football for a long time. I think Tua made it look too easy, and I think Georgia made it look a little easy at times too. And I think their schedule probably hurt them. It would have really helped if Georgia played a marquee opponent this year out of conference, or if Georgia Tech had any kind of a heartbeat. But they're such a horrible opponent that they got no credit for playing Georgia Tech, none whatsoever. In fact, some people argued that Oklahoma beating Army was a better win, right? Because Army has 10 or 11 wins this year. Now, if you ask me, Georgia Tech and Army, I'd flip a coin if they played a game tomorrow. Very similar teams. We saw what Georgia did to Georgia Tech. We saw that Oklahoma took overtime against Army. But I think it really hurt Georgia that Georgia Tech stunk so bad that win didn't resonate with anybody, and as I said all year. And I think it hurt also that they played Middle Tennessee State, a bowl team, but a team that doesn't really resonate with anybody. And they played an FCS team in Austin Peay. So maybe had they had a Clemson or a Notre Dame or somebody on their schedule that would have impressed more people, maybe that could have been used as an argument. But as it was, they didn't have that marquee non-conference win. And that's something to keep an eye out for. And that's something that Kirby Smart has talked a lot about, playing better teams, going for the 9-game schedule. I think Kirby Smart's really, really kind of ahead of the game here in some of his ideas.
I think that's interesting, Mike. Let me finish up with this. You mentioned Mel Tucker a moment ago, and you recently wrote an interesting piece at DawgNation.com about what your thoughts would be on Kirby Smart's process as he goes about replacing Mel Tucker at defensive coordinator, either with an internal promotion or an outside hire. For the folks who haven't gotten a chance to read that yet at DawgNation.com, or maybe your thoughts have been updated here over the last couple of days, where are you in terms of how you view how Georgia's going to go about this process? I don't think it's going to be in a big hurry because for the bowl game, this defense is well established and well in place, even without Mel Tucker there. And it looks like Georgia's well taken care of on the recruiting trail because guys like Bakari Rambo, off-field analysts have kind of stepped in as a recruiting role here. But when it comes, time to finally name the replacement, kind of give us your thought process on how Kirby Smart will go about these deliberations.
Well, first of all, I think it's a very important hire. I think it's not as important as if Jim Chaney would. I think Jim Chaney is the golden goose. I know fans, it's so easy to pick on play callers and point to them, but I think Jim Chaney is truly one of the best in the country. I think Kirby has respect for him over the last few weeks. I heard Kirby, making a lot of compliments to Jim Chaney when he didn't need to, going out of his way to praise him, making sure people understood that Jim Chaney came up with a really good game plan, or Jim Chaney made a really good call. And that's Kirby's way of letting people know how much respect he has for his coaches. And I'm not saying that Jim Chaney is the complete head coach of offense. I don't think he has that much power. I think Kirby gives him parameters to work within. But I think the offensive coordinator is the most important assistant to Kirby Smart on that staff, because I think Kirby does defer more there, certainly, than he does on defense. Now, the reason this coaching hire is important is because this is somebody that's got to work really closely with Kirby. And Kirby is a very, very involved coach. He's not a guy that stands there with his arms crossed and watches from a distance. He's running up, he's yelling, he's screaming, he's getting in people's faces, he's motivating these kids. And he's got to have a coordinator that understands that Kirby Smart is the head coach of the defense, and somebody that thinks like Kirby Smart. And it's got to be somebody that Kirby respects. He respected Mel Tucker. Look at Mel Tucker's resume. My goodness, what an all-star assistant coach Mel Tucker was, with all those years of NFL experience and the ability to work side by side with Kirby seamlessly, even as Kirby got that involved in all the drills. So it's hard to bring in an outsider who doesn't speak Kirby language, who doesn't, understand what he's getting. That's why I'm leaning towards it being somebody internal that has worked with Kirby before, that is familiar with Kirby, that knows what they're getting into. Not to say it's a bad job, but you just have to understand you have a very involved head coach working with you as the defensive coordinator and as the secondary coach. And it's somewhat similar to Alabama. This is why a lot of the hires at Alabama are internal on defense. They're promoted from within. It makes perfect sense for Schumann to be promoted and Bakari Rambo to step in. Now, that's not to say that's going to happen. I think Kirby will play this out. There's a coaches convention the 6th to the 9th. There's a lot of dynamite coaches out there. And if you're looking at this Georgia secondary and you want to buy stock in a position group at Georgia and you want to buy stock on a college football team, let me tell you, that's the place to be, because Georgia's going to be real good next year. That secondary is going to be outstanding next year. I think it was already the best in the country this year. I think it's got a chance to be the best in the country again. So that is a golden opportunity for somebody. I think Kirby, like you said, no rush to do it. They've got a staff in place that can handle this. Let things play out. See how things go in bowl prep. If things go smoothly, maybe Kirby does just promote from within. But you never know who might be out there. I know I mentioned Derek Ansley, and Chip and I talked about it, and we both talked about Derek Ansley, a guy that played at Troy, a guy I talked to last year after the Alabama national championship game with Georgia. I was in the locker room talking with Derek, and I was talking to him about Jeremy Pruitt, because remember, I was covering Tennessee then.
Sure.
But I talked to Derek even beyond that, about some of his aspirations. And so right now he's the secondary coach with the Oakland Raiders. So that would also, kind of stretch out the hire if he's indeed a candidate. Not real sure. He may see the path to head coach going from working with John Gruden as a secondary coach. But you never know. Maybe Kirby talks to him and the money's just as good to make all those recruiting hours worth it, and he sees that as a path where he wants to go. I'm not real sure. I don't think that's played out yet because the NFL season is ongoing. So as much as all of us want to know who the next guy's going to be, I think it's a process. I think Kirby's got some ideas. I think he's already got some really good options in place that you've discussed and I just discussed. But I don't think he's going to rule anything out. Really smart coaches, they play all their options out. They look at everything before they make a move. And if there's one thing I'll say about Kirby Smart that I've learned this season, BA, he is thorough. He doesn't miss anything. And so I think this is going to play out, and those are the pieces of the puzzle that I see before me right now.
Mike, that's fascinating stuff. We appreciate you sharing all of that with us. Really good insight and opinions and information. Look forward to reading a lot more from you coming up soon at DawgNation.com as we head towards the Sugar Bowl. And, of course, speaking to you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza again very soon as well. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Brent.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I tell you, I think Mike is spot on about the whole notion of the 2019 season beginning with the Sugar Bowl. Now, I will also provide one counterexample to that, and gamblers know this, that one of the things that we have a tendency to do wrong in college football a lot of times is use a bowl win one year as a prediction for the future year. A team that wins its bowl game will oftentimes be overranked by the preseason AP poll the following year, and they end up not living up to that. Or, people kind of get involved in either, over-under for season win totals or just, straight point spread bets based on what happened to bowl game. Bowl games can be false positives. The reason why I don't think that Georgia falls prey to that, though, is because Georgia's going to be highly ranked no matter what. Georgia could lose 31-3 to Texas. It's still going to be one of the top 5 preseason teams in the country probably next year. I mean, Georgia's going to be a very highly rated team, whether it wins or loses to Texas. So Georgia's ranking won't come on the heels of beating Texas, But in terms of really keeping the edge and the proper mindset going into next season, that whole notion of, as we're going to talk about a lot, unfinished business, leaving no doubt in the committee's mind come next December, that does start against Texas. And even though the committee says that won't officially be part of its criteria, listen, these are human beings, prone to, human fallacy here. And my guess is that Georgia can sway some voters for next season by beating up on Texas on January 1st in New Orleans. We're looking forward to being a part of that with Dog Nation's Sugar Bowl coverage, by the way. Before we move on to our SEC through, let me remind you about a big event taking place today and then tomorrow, depending on where you are. It's Vince Dooley signing copies of his cool new books at Kroger. It's today at the Woodstock Kroger. The address, and I'll give this to you a couple of times, is 2295 Town Lake Parkway. Once again, that's 2295 Town Lake Parkway today from 4 to 6 p.m. Coach Dooley signing either his book, Dooley, My 40 Years at Georgia, or the newest book, The Legion's Fighting Bulldog. That's today at the Woodstock Kroger. Then tomorrow, if you're up in the north part of the state, Dalton at 1365 West Walnut Avenue, also from 4 to 6 p.m. Once again, 1365 West Walnut Avenue. Coach Dooley, they're signing books at Kroger. What a cool thing Kroger's doing for the holidays, giving you a chance to meet the legendary former Georgia coach and get a great gift for that Bulldog fan on your list here. Really good stuff from Kroger on that. All right, SEC through time. LSU met with the media yesterday, and a lot of stuff comes up, very similar to what's come up with a lot of SEC programs as of late. That's who is and who is not playing in bowl games. It's already been announced that LSU cornerback Greedy Williams will not play in his team's bowl game, although LSU linebacker Devin White will. Now, White, who could come back to LSU next season, has not made his decision yet about whether or not he plans on doing that, but he is going to play in the Fiesta Bowl against UCF. He doesn't fault Williams for his decision not to play, and for the most part, I've said this over and over again, but these are all business decisions. And I can't fault someone who says, hey, listen, I don't want to put my future and my career in jeopardy. I can't necessarily fault you for that, but as a selfish college football fan, I like the idea that some of these players still think these bowl games matter. I take some comfort in knowing that for guys like Devin White and guys like DeAndre Baker, these games are at least still important to them. One of the things, though, that Baker also said that I think is, this could be really tough for LSU fans if it works out the other way. White, in discussing the potential that he might come back, talked about wanting to win a championship for LSU and bring a championship to Louisiana, wanted to be the best linebacker in LSU history. But he also acknowledges that he might still go to the NFL. Can you imagine getting up the LSU fans' hopes that way of, hey, we're going to bring a championship back to Louisiana? On second thought, I better go play in the NFL because I'm going to be a first-round draft pick. I think that's kind of interesting language coming out of LSU as they try to be the SEC team, unlike Auburn a year ago that fell prey to UCF. They try to take care of some business against the Golden Knights, shorthanded in Tempe coming up this bowl season. All right, looks like Alabama, at least according to Football Scoop, may be zeroing in on a new offensive coordinator. Football Scoop is reporting they're just going to promote Dan Enos from within. Enos is a really good coach, and he was a good offensive coordinator at Arkansas, even though the old school stats don't necessarily show how good he really was, but he was a really good coach. It looks like he may just get that promotion. That's pretty much what I expected to happen all the way around. I would also guess that Enos, who was a head coach before becoming Arkansas offensive coordinator, he left the head coaching position at Central Michigan to go be Arkansas OC. This could be a situation where Alabama's having to replace an offensive coordinator again next year. They've gotten really comfortable doing that. My guess is if Enos has the kind of year that you'd expect the Alabama offensive coordinator to have, he may be gone after next season too. He is certainly a candidate for other head coaching positions just given what he's done as of late. And by the way, speaking of offensive coordinators, I thought this was weird. The Phil Longo, the Ole Miss offensive coordinator, has left that job to take the same position at North Carolina. Now, this is at best a lateral move, but obviously, it's potentially a bit of a statement about the uneasy situation of the Matt Luke administration there in Oxford and, that coaching staff that had kind of an ugly season, couldn't stop anybody defensively. They did bring in Mike McIntyre to hopefully change that, the ex-Colorado coach. But Longo, whose offense put up big numbers in the SEC this year, going to be a part of Mac Brown's staff at North Carolina. And I guess my overall takeaway here is a couple things. First of all, there are already some rumors out there that former Ole Miss assistant Dan Werner, who was the quarterback's coach at South Carolina, he may be heading back to the Rebels as offensive coordinator here. But I think this just goes to show you that Ole Miss sets up next season with all the guys that it's losing. this sets up to not be a very good team next year. And right now, the SEC West gives you a couple of those. It gives you Ole Miss. It gives you Arkansas in a way that the SEC East just does not have a doormat. The bad teams, so to speak, in the SEC East, the unranked teams are teams like Vanderbilt, which is going to a bowl. Missouri, which I guess now is ranked and was actually pretty good by the end of the season. Kentucky's like 15th in the country. That's a traditional doormat in the SEC East. Right now, there are no easy outs at all in the SEC East, where there are at least two in the SEC West. So keep that in mind as you're making your 2019 predictions. Who do you get to play from the West, and can you feast on a couple of those really bad SEC West teams? Because for next season, there are indeed a couple of those. All right, we got a couple more things we're going to do here today on a DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. A transfer has mentioned Georgia. I will tell you about that. And some of you have requested that I talk about kind of a funny situation coming out of Gainesville, the University of Florida. I will do that. Let me tell you about one more thing before we do. If you're looking for a last-minute Christmas gift for a hard-to-buy-for dog fan, well, you're going to love this brand-new book by a UGA grad named Jeffrey Head. Now, one of the things we like to doing here on a DawgNation Daily is kind of highlighting some of the great works done by UGA grads. Well, Jeffrey Head is an example of that. This is a terrific stocking stuffer, a brand-new novel. This is a novel from him called Unholy Intentions. It's a book based in Atlanta that's a kind of about lethal terrorists and the FBI's counter-terror team headquartered right here in Atlanta. So it's a great thriller, a great authentic Atlanta book. The name of the book, once again, is Unholy Intentions. It's available on iBooks or at Nook Book at Barnes & Noble, so make sure you check that out. Unholy Intentions by UGA grad Jeffrey Head, a terrific novel for the holiday season. If you like stories based in Atlanta, if you like terrorist stories and anti-terrorist methods of stopping that, great thrillers like that, Unholy Intentions by Jeffrey Head is the book for you. So check it out there on iBooks or kind of wherever you find books, including our friends at Barnes & Nobles. Check out Unholy Intentions there. All right, a couple things to get to here. First of all, a grad transfer tight end leaving Auburn has mentioned Georgia here. Let me show you this message on social media from a tight end here. Jalen, what's his name again? Jaylen Harris, excuse me. Jaylen Harris is his name. Has played a little bit each of the last 4 years at Auburn, although did announce in September that he was going to hold back and basically preserve his final year of eligibility. Took the red shirt last year so he could transfer this year. He mentions Vanderbilt, Troy, Kansas State, Colorado, and Georgia as his finalists for transferring here. He's going to be making that decision coming up. This is not a guy that I know a ton about, but the one thing I've talked about a lot on DawgNation Daily in the past is my belief that when it comes to filling out your roster, filling them out with potential veteran transfers, that has a way of really working out. Now, for Georgia, they've got mixed results on this. Guys like Demetrius Robertson and Jay Hayes didn't do as much for Georgia this season as some would have expected. But guys like Maurice Smith and J.R. Reed were even better than you might have guessed. So it's hard to know where things could go with Harris here, the tight end. But he is a veteran presence. Maybe this is some foreshadowing that maybe Georgia knows what's going to happen with Isaac Nada, or maybe Georgia's not that involved with him at all. After all, as the Georgia program grows, you're going to see more and more guys mention Georgia as finalists, both heading towards signing day and his transfer destination, just because it's sort of the program to be. But nonetheless here, as Georgia adds a tight end with its 2019 class from the high school ranks in Rylan Goody, it could be in the mix for a transfer tight end here, and that is certainly worth paying attention to. Let me also mention this. Lloyd Summerall is a defensive end from down in Florida, and he recently took a visit to the University of Florida, and we'll go ahead and fire up our fight song music to kind of close this show out, and we'll get ready to do our Gator Hitter Updater. But a lot of you had seen this picture on social media of Summerall's dad, who gets in the mix with Lloyd on the Florida campus, going full uniform here. And listen, I tried to avoid talking about this because I guess I don't want to, make too much fun of this. But it's obviously kind of a weird deal to see the dad in a full uniform next to his son. There's a certain extent to this. This is the kind of thing that seems to only be able to happen at Florida. This is sort of a very University of Florida centric story. They just seem to have a very different way about going about their recruiting process. I guess here's the one thing I can promise my young son: if he's ever in a position to get a college scholarship, I promise you right now, and I'll hold myself to this 15 years from now, or however many years from now, 11 years from now, I will not dress up in a uniform next to you when you take your recruiting picture. That's my promise to him. By the way, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, it's been 774 days since they've beaten Georgia. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, we got some time. Yeah, I was going to try to avoid that picture just because, I don't know. That seems almost a little too real world for me to make too much fun about. But clearly there is certainly a mockable characteristic to that. But I guess if you don't know the whole story, maybe you shouldn't say anything. Nonetheless, y'all seem to be enjoying that. Brian McBride giving some laughing emojis on that. TJ Smith says Florida's just pitiful. Yeah, there is certainly a.
Yeah. Can I pose?
Here's Connor Riley, by the way.
One, I don't have any problem with Summerall's dad doing what he did. Like, that's a cool moment for dad and son.
First of all, he looks better in a uniform than I would.
Right.
I'll give him credit for that.
Second, let's say your son says, "Dad, if you don't put on this full uniform, I'm not going to commit to Georgia. I'm going to commit to Florida."
Oh, listen, at that point in time, I'll dress up like full uniform. I'll dress up like a cheerleader. I'll dress up like whatever. If it came down to that, a couple of the players we've talked about in today's show, Trey Sanders, Jayden Hazelwood, if I thought that I'd get them over the hump, I'd get in full uniform and full regalia. I'd do the show in a uniform. First of all, I did the show before the head just dressed like Batman the other day, so it's not that big of a leap to say I'd also be in a uniform as well.
That is correct.
That is good stuff from Connor Riley there. Yeah, no doubt about it. Amos Williams, by the way, on the Florida front says, Bama's our real problem. Why are we worried about Florida? So, Amos, I do get that. And when it comes to recruiting and on field, Alabama's going to be a bigger thorn in Georgia's side. But remember, the way it works for Georgia, because it doesn't play Alabama in the regular season, you got some business to take care of before you get to Alabama. And that means Florida. Florida's going to be a preseason, highly ranked team once again in 2019. They're in a major bowl this year. Plus, I think it's also important to highlight Florida because I think it highlights a false narrative that exists about Georgia. There's this knock on Georgia of the reason why I didn't make the college football playoff, and you've heard this, is, well, they lost the two best teams they played. In what universe did Georgia lose to the two best teams that played? Florida is ranked higher than LSU. Florida beat LSU, and Georgia beat Florida by 19 points. So, let's make sure we correct the record here that the SEC was a deep league this year. Georgia from the SEC played 4 teams ranked in the top 15 away from home. Georgia lost 2 of those games, but it won 2 of those games. And it won the 2 that it did win in decidedly impressive fashion in Lexington against Kentucky, in Jacksonville against Florida. So, I am going to celebrate the win for Georgia against Florida this season as a pretty significant accomplishment. And I am going to look forward to next year in terms of leaving no doubt for the committee after having beaten Alabama. You got to take care of Florida in Jacksonville to get there. The road to that rematch with Alabama goes through Jacksonville and Florida once again. By the way, Drew Miller says, my home city, Rockmart High School, competing in their in a state championship game. Let me get the rest of this comment here. He says, at their state championship day at the Benz against Heard County at 1 p.m. So proud of them. Yeah, that's great. As he points out, that's also the home of Danny Ware. Congratulations to Rockmart. And really cool to see the state championships here over the course of yesterday and today, and it's a little bit weird having these games on Tuesday and Wednesday, but nonetheless, it is kind of nice to see state championship football here in the city of Atlanta, all across the state being represented. That's really cool. John Anthony says if DeAndre Swift's dad had tried to put on a uniform like that, he didn't think his arms would fit into it. Yeah, talk about somebody that looked like a player if he was dressed in one of those uniforms. Swift's dad probably would. That's probably a pretty good point. Furman Parton says, is that a blind squirrel over there? Yeah, Furman. This is our buddy Eddie, who's on the set with us every single day here on DawgNation Daily. He's the unofficial mascot to our show, as Dan Mullen points out. The blind squirrel occasionally finds the nut. Well, this blind squirrel's found himself 2 straight nuts against Florida, 42-7, and by 19 points this past year. So we like to remind that. Ray Brandon says, with 19 already committed, how many spots do we have left open for the other guys to take? Ray, that's a great question. I won't even pretend to know for sure about that. Stevie Richardson celebrating Bainbridge state championship. What a great game that was against Warner Robins yesterday. The younger from in thrilling fashion bringing that team back, and what an amazing year for Bainbridge, as we kind of discussed. Overcoming what it overcame after kind of a slow start to the season. Pretty impressive stuff. Neil Adams asked an interesting question on Facebook. BA, do you think we have a shot at Evan Neal and Darnell Wright? Also, another duo with 1,000 yards this year could look good to Sanders and Kane. So, first of all, I agree with you on that one of the reasons why Georgia's in the mix for running backs like Noah Kane and Trey Sanders is because of the offensive line recruitment that Georgia's been able to do. And I think you're also right to say that that next level of recruitment's got to take place when it comes to, when it comes to the tackle position. Georgia's done well at center, done well at guard, those interior offensive linemen, but Georgia's got to have more depth at tackle. Obviously, I guess Evan Neal was reported to have just taken a visit to Georgia, I believe. And then Darnell Wright, I think, has a visit upcoming based on, I think, what Jeff Sentell had said. So when it comes to those guys, I think that in large measure, Georgia would not be considered the point spread favorite for either guy. For some reason, I've always thought it was a little bit more likely that Georgia might get in on Wright than Neal. I just never really felt like there was much there when it comes to Evan Neal. But obviously Darnell Wright, who I think is a really impressive player, Georgia's going to get its shot there, and I think that would be a massive, huge, about as big as anything that Georgia could do for this class. Darnell Wright would be right there in that group. Matt Rukavina reminding us of a great, funny line. He said this back in August, that Tennessee's new fight song is Home for the Holidays. That is a really funny – Matt, that's a really funny line. Really funny line. Ray Brandon says Region 1 repping in the Benz this year. Yeah, listen – that Region 1 down there in South Georgia is good stuff. There's no doubt about that. Good stuff. Memphis Dog says that Eddie needs a jersey. Yeah, Eddie's got his sign. Maybe we can get Eddie a jersey at some point in time. That's not a bad idea. Maybe we'll do that at some point. Maybe he can get himself like a Georgia helmet or something like that. That's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. Let me see what else is going on here in the YouTube comment section. Rania Watley says Georgia's well on its way. To anybody that says any different aren't qualified to speak dumbness. So Rania putting somebody in their place, and I guess from time to time that does happen. Let me scroll up and get a few more comments here. Brian Kephart on the 2019 schedule for Georgia says an early test from Notre Dame might work well and help put us on track to play the whole year to get the playoffs next year. No test until LSU hurt us, I think. Yeah, I think that's true, Brian. I think the other thing that Georgia may have going for it in 2019 that it did not quite have in 2018, the fact of the matter is Georgia, when it played LSU, lost because at that time, Georgia was not national championship good. You pretty much have to be a national championship level team to win in Baton Rouge. Alabama has done that with regularity over the last few years, but for the most part, nobody else has. Good teams, lose in Baton Rouge. It's only the great teams that find a way to win in Death Valley. At that time, Georgia was good, not great. DeAndre Swift got healthier. The team kind of gelled. Young players on defense emerged, including Jordan Davis. And by the time you got to November, Georgia was just a much better version of itself than it was in early October or close to mid-October in Baton Rouge. So what Georgia hopefully has next season is a situation where it's a little more seasoned, a little more developed, and all of a sudden at that point, you don't quite have the need to have dramatic improvement over the course of a year. Now, you do hope to improve week to week from September through November, but hopefully Georgia can be a little bit more consistent version of itself throughout the entirety of the season next year, and it will have those tentpole games, Notre Dame in September, kind of Florida in October, Texas A&M in November, where you can judge just how good this team really is and have a good feeling about that, going back to what you hope is a third straight SEC championship game appearance. So I think that's a really interesting point. I think that hopefully Georgia is a version of itself versus Notre Dame in September that is at least resembling what it will be near the end of the season against Texas A&M. That's what I hope you see anyway. What else we got going on here on YouTube? Let me get a few more. Enrique Murillo says LSU will be used as a motivational game to teach players what happens when we don't execute as a team. You get caught sleeping, you lose the game. Yeah, Enrique, I think you're probably right about that. Kirby Smart even alluded to that before the season began, that they wouldn't really know about their leaders until they face some level of adversity, and the LSU game obviously provided that. Georgia didn't respond well in that environment that day. Much like it had been Auburn the year before that. You hope you don't need that game again in 2019, as many of you have said. But I think that you're also saying that what happened for LSU, what happened in LSU this season, can be still used as a reminder next season of don't get caught napping, don't get caught with less than your top level of focus and less than your top level of performance. I think you're right about that. I think there's a very good chance that's exactly how Georgia uses that. Let me go up here and get a few more. Some of you are talking about Owen Popo and kind of how he might fit to Georgia's plans. I think at this point in time, and Jeff Sintel's been telling us all this forever. From the moment that Popo chose Auburn, Jeff thought that ship for Georgia had sailed. And I'll give Jeff a lot of credit. He was really the first person I heard saying that, Popo's probably a safety anyway. And I think as we get closer, we find out that Jeff was really right on both those fronts. That Georgia never really did get back involved again with Owen Popo, even though I thought they probably would. And that Popo really probably isn't a linebacker at a school like Georgia. Now, does Auburn give him a chance to play the linebacker position because they're not quite as deep as the Dogs? There's a chance that happens. Maybe that does indeed become the case. But for Georgia, Popo is just not going to be a linebacker the same way that Ryan Davis can be, that Tresman Marshall will be, and Nakobe Dean would be. Now, Dean's still a wait-and-see name, but in terms of the linebackers that Georgia has, I think based on the film they've put out there, they are all three better fits for Georgia than Owen Popo would have been. And y'all can go back and listen to those shows last summer. I mean, I was heavy on the Popo train at the time, even thought that the smokescreen that was out there of him choosing Auburn was going to end up being wrong. And he probably still would choose UGA. Well, as it turns out, I was wrong about that and was wrong about a lot when it comes to Popo. Popo has moved on somewhere else. Maybe he flips to Tennessee. I don't know. But for now, he's not in Georgia's plans, and the linebackers that are in Georgia's plans really, truly do seem to be better overall fits for the program. That's no shot at Popo. He could be a very good player. Somebody in the comment section compared him to Otis Reese. That's probably his closest comparison. But Georgia's already got an Otis Reese. I don't know that you need another one of those right now. Ty Middlebrook, going back to the notion of running the East. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously Georgia's goal, is to keep, when we first made that Own the East phrase, that so many of you have those Own the East T-shirts, we first made the Own the East, logo when that phrase first became popular around here. I mean, my idea was that if you look at great programs, they put together streaks of divisions. Our buddy Connor Riley's a New England Patriots fans. What were the Patriots won? 11 straight AFC East or something like that? 10 straight. Yeah, 10 straight AFC East. Your path to the Super Bowl is made so much easier when you can virtually guarantee that you'll win your division. College football works the same way. Now, Alabama doesn't have a long streak of winning the SEC West. Auburn has stepped in there and stolen that from them from time to time. LSU, I guess, did the same thing in 2011. But when you can guarantee yourself a division title, taking care of that first domino to put yourself in the conference championship game, it just makes getting the college football playoff that much easier. So Own the East was never a one-year thing for us. It was always sort of an idea in perpetuity that Georgia would do this year after year after year, and next year it'll go for 3 straight. And that's a big deal. And Florida trying to get better just makes that a slightly bigger challenge, but I believe it's a challenge that Georgia will step up and face. Enrique Murillo says that Florida is corny, and I guess that's kind of true, right? I mean, some of the stuff we've seen from Dan Mullen. There was that video of the hip-hop guy. Is it Klondike? What's the guy's name? Kodak. That he's like a popular hip-hop guy. I don't know a lot about hip-hop music, but he was there, and when you see is it Quavo that's the Georgia fan? Like, he's like authentically involved in the Georgia program. He knows the players and coaches. The players and coaches know him. The video of the guy at the Florida thing the other day was so different from that. It's like the Florida players were lined up like they were gonna get their picture taken with Santa Claus. I mean, it was like the most inauthentic staged event in the world. And like as Enrique said on YouTube, it's just a corny thing. Somehow Dan Mullen in Florida, it's almost like he's trying on somebody else's clothes. It's like he's not comfortable yet in his own skin. He, comes across as sort of a brash, Florida-style coach, the way that Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer kind of were. But when Mullen does it, it seems like an imitation of what he's seen people do in the past. And, I'm sure that's, a Georgia guy talking about Florida. What would you expect? But I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of the on-field results. recruiting results and the videos we see and the photos and the images we see popping up from Gainesville, I think you see a lot of that. Philip Jordan Wells is laughing at me. Did I call him Klondike? Excuse me, Kodak, not Klondike. Montez Cole liking that as well. Sorry, y'all. The one thing that I gave up on a long time ago is, like, used to be when I was younger, I tried to be cool, and I always failed. And when I stopped even trying to be cool, I became so much happier as a person, because there's nothing worse than, like, aspiring towards something that you'll never be. So once I realized that I can't be cool and just, I can just be the dorky me, I became much, much happier. Much happier. Much happier. Brandon Jackson says about, the comparison between Georgia and Florida when it comes to recruiting, that Georgia's a family affair. We link tight like a motorcycle chain. Yeah, I like that, Brandon. And I think that when you see these recruiting things for Georgia, you do see examples of that. You see how well all that works out for UGA, and it's really kind of a nice thing. It's kind of a nice thing to see. No doubt. Y'all still talking about Klondike. That's so funny. That's so funny. Bobby Gilly talking about tight ends. We talked about Jalen. Is it Jalen Harris? Jalen Harris, the Auburn guy. So I don't know what to make of that. I don't know the first thing about Jalen Harris.
Harris, yes.
I don't. That's Connor Riley, by the way. I don't know if Georgia's considering Jalen Harris. I'm old enough to remember the Fab Five back when Michigan, the baggy shorts, Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, and all those guys. And back then, every basketball recruit in the country would list Michigan as one of their finalists. And, Steve Webber and the Michigan coaching staff at the time would always say, we're not recruiting any of these kids. They just mentioned Michigan as a finalist because we're kind of the cool, the cool school to go to. We got the cool uniforms. We got the famous players. We got the national attention. And you're going to see a lot more of that from Georgia. Now, Georgia may really be in on Harris, or they may not be. But the same way there are a lot of schools that are like, hey, I'm going to choose between Purdue, Iowa, and Alabama. And then they end up going to, Iowa or somewhere like that. Georgia's going to show up as a lot of finalists for a lot of players in the future, just based on the fact that it is a program that is very much growing in stature right now. Connor, by the way, you were at Jayden Hazelwood's game yesterday.
I was at Jayden Hazelwood's game, and I was there for at the end of the Tresman Marshall game, got over there a little late. And then I was there for the first half of the Bainbridge Warner Robins game. So I
heard that was an awesome game.
You can imagine my surprise when I got home and checked the score and saw that it was going into overtime.
Yeah, because Bainbridge jumps out big, and Fromm brings them back.
Fromm brings them back. Unfortunately they lose in overtime. But really an incredible day. And I will say, for the Cedar Grove game that I watched, if there are any of you from Peach County, I feel terrible. Cedar Grove had no business winning that game. I went back and checked today. The Cedar Grove offense had 5 false start penalties in the fourth quarter alone and a delay of game penalty. They also had to take a timeout on their final drive to prevent another delay of game penalty. And the only reason Cedar Grove won that game was because on their final drive, Jayden Hazelwood had a 58-yard kickoff return to put them in Peach County territory, and then he had a 22-yard touchdown catch on the second to last play of the game on 3rd and 22. In a play that was pretty well covered. It was just Hazelwood made an incredible play there to win the game.
Seems like a tactical error to kick to Hazelwood. Now I realize it's not as easy for high school kickers to kick it into the end zone, although by rule in high school, if the ball goes into the end zone, you can't bring it out. Not as easy for a high school kicker to kick it into the end zone, but you got to find a way to kick away from Hazelwood right there. Right.
I think Peach County in hindsight was like, we should have just kicked it out of bounds, because earlier in the game he had another big kick return. And actually, it would have been even bigger, but there was a block in the back penalty, and Hazelwood, instead of, he saw them throwing the flags, instead of, continuing to run down and return it for a touchdown, which I think he would have, he just slid out of bounds because he knew, what was happening. But I know between us personally, I've chided you for, saying Hazelwood's this good.
Sure.
You've kind of neglected Dominic Blaylock, who I think is also an excellent player.
Yeah, I mean, you're not the only one who has thought that I have been overly obsessed with Jayden Hazelwood. It's probably the thing I get the most criticism for in our comment section is talking too much about Hazelwood.
I'm willing to admit I was wrong. He is without a doubt a player Georgia has to land.
Yeah.
He is that good. He is that special. He single-handedly won his team a state championship yesterday.
Yeah, I just really believe that Hazelwood is going to be a difference maker for a national championship, and it is no small feat because at that classification, Peach County is a loaded roster every year. And Kirby Smart has mentioned Peach County by name a couple times. It's a school that produces Kyrus Jackson, a lot of other players. That is a tough as nails program.
It is. It
is hard to beat Peach County.
They've got a 2021 kid, Terrence Ferguson, who early on looks like Georgia might be very much in on. He's a huge left tackle. That team has produced player after player, and they very well should have been. If Jayden Hazelwood's not in that game, they're state champions, and I don't necessarily think that game yesterday is all that close without Hazelwood.
Yeah, so I think that it's another example. Now, I know for some of you, the shoes with all the logos, you're not going to love that. But, y'all, I mean, Connor was there. He saw it in person. The video we showed you earlier, he shot that himself. I mean, that's a guy that's certainly worthy of the hype that he's getting. A couple other comments I want to mention here in our comment section. Nager Yang in our Facebook comment section asked me if I went to the Atlanta United parade the other day. I did not get a chance to go to that, although it was happening just down the road from where we do this show each and every day. I will admit I'm not the biggest soccer fan in the world. I guess I'm kind of curious. The reason why I bring this up, I'd love to hear from many of you. What's kind of interesting about DawgNation is we have people that live in other states that watch this show. So oftentimes your favorite professional sports teams aren't necessarily from Atlanta. I am curious to find out how many of you were into the soccer thing. Were you watching United? For me, that's just not my deal. I'm not mad at you if it is. I'm not like anti-soccer guy necessarily, but I'm not a big fan. I guess I would be curious to find out how many of you were heavily involved with that. John Templeton also brings up in our Facebook comment section the latest on the defensive coordinator search. John, I can give you my opinion on this. My opinion is that if Georgia could hire a guy like Derek Ansley, the former Alabama assistant and current Raiders defensive backs coach, my guess is they probably will. And if they can't, my guess is they'll probably hire from within, which means probably promoting a guy like Glenn Schumann. That is solely my opinion, but that is my opinion. Connor, my question for you, because you follow the NFL a lot more closely than I do, I know that for NFL teams that want to hire other NFL assistants, there is a window in which they can speak to them. Does that rule also exist for
position coaches,
college teams? For instance, if you make the playoffs, there's that one window of days where you can kind of go interview for promotions and things like that, and then beyond that, you got to shut it down, and go back to work for your team again. Is Georgia contractually prohibited from speaking to Ansley right now? Do you have any idea?
So as far as I know, I believe that the NFL teams have to grant you permission to go interview for another job, whether you be a position coach or a coordinator looking to move up.
Right.
So I believe that is the theoretical issue, if there is one here.
Yeah, because in the NFL, if I'm correct about this, NFL contracts prohibit coaches from taking lateral moves, correct?
Correct.
You can't go be, I don't like it in Oakland, I'm going to go be defensive backs coach in Arizona now. You're not allowed to do that.
Oakland would have to let him do that.
Right,
Oakland gets the final say on whether or not he can actually do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil Adams also asking about John Rice Plumlee at Ole Miss. Yeah, those rumors are out there. We did talk to Jeff about that yesterday. I think this comes down to, Georgia has talked to that quarterback from Hawaii. What's his name, Connor? Do you remember?
Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, Dylan Gabriel. They talked to him. John Rice Plumlee is a very interesting prospect in that he was not so much of a quarterback before the season began, but had a really good year in the state of Mississippi. Hattiesburg, I believe he's from, had a really good year. Put up very impressive stats, put up very impressive highlights, and got reclassified as a quarterback this year. I don't know how hard Georgia is going to fight to keep Plumlee if a school like Ole Miss says, we really, really want you, stay in state and come be here. Now, Ole Miss has also recruited a lot of quarterbacks as of late. Matt Corral was a premier quarterback prospect for the 2018 class, and he played some against Mississippi State, for instance, at the end of the year. But it looks like if Ole Miss prioritized John Rice Plumlee's recruitment, I don't know that Georgia's going to roll up its sleeves and go to the mat to fight for him. Maybe it does, but I just don't know. So I think that there is a chance that Plumlee could end up somewhere else if indeed Ole Miss does come after him very hard. A lot of you, by the way, are talking about the United thing in the comment section. I guess one of the things I wish we had more time to do from time to time, and maybe once signing day is over, maybe we'll do more of this. I am kind of fascinated by what y'all do beyond Georgia football. Like obviously around here, there's always something going on with Georgia every single day. But beyond that, what you're interested in is always interesting to me. So I'm always interested to hear from you about stuff like that. So it's kind of fun to watch those comments rolling in the Facebook comment section. And K9 Blues on YouTube says about John Rice Plumlee that he had accuracy issues last year, but looked great this year. Yeah, I mean, K9, to sort of put it bluntly and maybe too simplistically, he looked a lot more like a quarterback this year, where I think from the footage that you may have seen from him a year ago, he looked more like an athlete playing the position. I think the other thing when it comes to Plumlee is he is considered to be a very good baseball player. And, I don't know that Kirby Smart is all about those guys that have divided allegiances to the sport of football. I don't know how much Kirby Smart would be okay with that. But nonetheless, he is a pretty impressive player, and if he ends up as part of Georgia's class, I think it's good news. Georgia's got to build some quarterback depth somehow, and we're kind of in a weird era for doing that because quarterbacks want to play these days. Even a guy like John Rice Plumlee, may just not be, interested in being a part of Georgia's depth. He wants a chance to go to Ole Miss, where he could eventually become the guy there. Georgia's got to find a way to build that quarterback depth somehow. Diedrich Frazier on YouTube says, I don't care about soccer. To me, the Georgia curse is alive until the Braves or Falcons or the Dogs win it all. Diedrich, I think a lot of people probably agree with you on that.
I agree. The curse isn't broken. It's a great you've made this point.
Yeah.
For the curse to be broken, it has to be a world championship.
Yeah. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this because I don't want to anger the folks who do deeply care about the Atlanta United. I do believe that the MLS is a league championship, and we don't really have another comparison to that in American sports, right? But the NBA, the Major League Baseball, the Super Bowl, those are world championships. The best players in the world play in that league. Therefore, you have won a world championship when you win one of those leagues. The MLS is not quite that way for me. So, as I said, it's not my thing to criticize people who do like it, but that is not going to be my thing. However, I will say, when I was probably 10, 15 years ago, I was the most stereotypical anti-soccer guy you could get. Mm-hmm. And then I actually watched some soccer. It's not a bad sport.
I love watching soccer.
It's actually a pretty interesting sport. I don't know enough about it to be ever an expert, and there's probably been too much time passed I'll never learn. But had I grown up watching it, I'd probably really like it. Rania Watley talking about Clay Webb practicing. Yeah, that's his plan. Much the same way that Cade Mays did last year. Webb's going to try to practice some heading towards the bowl season there.
Yeah, he told Jeff and I on Monday he plans to,
that's right.
to hopefully be there on Friday.
Yeah, by the way, it's been a busy week for Connor Riley. He was at Oxford on Monday for the Clay Webb deal. He was in Atlanta yesterday for Jayden Hazelwood and Tresman Marshall. What was it like being in Oxford for that?
My actual biggest surprise was that when he announced Georgia, there was not a lot of upset, fans hoping he was going to Alabama or Auburn. There were a lot of people there that were very excited for Clay Webb and his decision, which surprised me a little bit.
I think stuff like that is when you're in the school, the people in the school know the guy, they're happy for the guy. Mm-hmm. But go to the diner across the street, it's probably a little different story.
Probably is.
Yeah,
that is correct.
You go to the Meat and 3 down the road, it's probably a little bit different story. But at the school itself, that's the case. I'm trying to think. I think the only, and you may correct me on this, because normally I'm sitting in this box when recruits make their announcement. I think the only commitment ceremony I've ever been at in person was Demetrius Robertson the first time when he went to Cal. I'm trying to think if I've ever been to another one besides that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, because normally I'm the guy that's hosting our end from here. I'm not on the road for that kind of stuff. I believe the only one I've ever seen in person was the D-Rob the first time around.
I believe that is correct.
Maybe
you shouldn't just go. Maybe you're just bad news.
Maybe so. Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'm the DawgNation curse. A lot of you want to keep me here because when I'm usually sitting here, things have a tendency to work out pretty well for Georgia when it comes to stuff like that. Nick Vernon says, BA, who are the most important remaining recruits based on needs? So I think that's a really interesting question, Nick. And I guess I would kind of mention a couple things here. Obviously, you got to think about defensive backs. And your biggest answers on those don't come for later. It's Kyrie Elam in February. It's Tyreek Stevens in early January. But those are huge, huge names. I said this on 960 The Ref this morning. I was on their morning show. For me, offensive tackle's not far beyond that. And I like Xavier Truss. I like Warren McClendon. But you better believe that some of my fingernail biting over the course of the next few days is going to be about, can Georgia really make up a bunch of ground late with Darnell Wright? If Georgia could do that, that's about as big as a Trey Sanders for me. That'd be about as big as a Nakobe Dean would be. Pulling a Darnell Wright late in the process would be a very big deal for me. Now, I sort of think it's probably not going to happen, but it would be a very big deal for me.
Not to sound too much like Jeff Sentell here, but is the Darnell Wright theoretical commitment the thing when you're coming down the stair on Christmas morning you're hoping to see under the Christmas tree that is Georgia's 2019 signing class?
I think here's how to answer that question. Ultimately, I still think Hazelwood's coming to Georgia. I'm going to be devastated if he doesn't, because even with all the shoes and all the, clueless about where he wants to go, those are Hazelwood's own words, I still ultimately think Hazelwood's going to choose Georgia. So I have, to the extent that I have kind of a mock class in my head, I've got Hazelwood's name on it. To the extent that I've got a mock class in my head, I've got Tyreek Stevenson and Kyrie Lam's name on it. Now, I may be disappointed about all three of those guys. There's a very reasonable case to be made that all three of those guys end up choosing other schools, and there's a reasonable case they all choose the same school other than Georgia. So I could be wrong about all three of those, but I have had them in the likely to get category for a while. So in terms of what would make me the most excited come, hay in the barn when it's all said and done, because some of these guys have slightly different announcement schedules, the biggest name of all for me would probably be Trey Sanders, because I do think Georgia needs that elite back. There is a chance that Sanders could commit to Georgia and actually be a contributor next season. There's a chance that could happen. Darnell Wright, if he comes to Georgia, is not going to do that next year. Nakobe Dean, if he comes to Georgia, is not going to do that next year. But of all these guys, not counting Stevenson and Hazelwood for a moment, of all these uncommitted names that are kind of floating out there for December 19th, Sanders is the one that'd be most likely to play next season. And it would be a huge rally for Georgia after getting left at the altar by John Ehret Jr. I'm not even sure they should have been messing with somebody from Louisiana anyway. But they did. They went down that road. It didn't work out. If they could then rally and get in with Trey Sanders and actually win, that'd be a huge deal for me. But I'll go back to what I said to start the show. I liked Sanders to Georgia a lot more before he started tweeting all this stuff and Instagram and all this stuff. That Instagram thing that we showed you off the top of the show today, that lands with me really wrong. That does not come across as a guy that's on his way to Georgia. That comes across as a guy that wants to flirt with Georgia fans and get Georgia fans drawn off sides.
It's worth pointing out there was also some Texas love on that same Instagram story.
Is that right?
That is correct. He
okay.
had, I believe, 1 or 2 Texas pictures on there. So to take it back to our Christmas tree analogy. So Jayden Hazelwood is the bike. You think you're getting it.
Yeah.
We all feel safe. We might not get it, but we feel pretty good about that. I think Tyreek Stevenson is the Red Rifle BB gun.
Oh, yeah.
You want to feel pretty good about it. You obviously think you need to have it, but there are now some reasons why you might not end up getting it. And for you, Trey Sanders is the Nintendo 64, the thing that when you unwrap it and it's what you think it is, you're the little kid screaming on YouTube.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I think, to kind of say this analogy in another way, 10 years from now, this is going to be remembered as the Jayden Hazelwood class. Mm-hmm. 10 years from now, this will be remembered as the time that Jayden Hazelwood chose the University of Georgia because of the impact he's going to one day make at the program. But in terms of what would make me the most excited on signing day, for me, Sanders would be that situation. And I'm always going to have a bias in favor of guys that we don't know what they're doing. It's the Deans, it's the Sanders, it's Stevenson come January when he does his thing. That doesn't mean they are the most important players in the class necessarily, but they are the ones that get you the most excited because you don't know about them. Rick Martin, by the way, on Facebook says he thinks that Nakobe Dean's going to Ole Miss. I know there's a lot of that kind of talk out there. I don't really believe that. And I know that a lot of very smart people say they don't know what Nakobe Dean's going to do, and I think they're probably right when they say that. But I also believe that even when information is conflicting, conventional wisdom still rules. And the conventional wisdom here is this comes down to Alabama and Georgia, and it's really hard to get a player to come from Memphis through Tuscaloosa to get to Athens. That's conventional wisdom, and that's why I don't believe that Georgia's a point spread favorite for Nakobe Dean, although I do think they have a very good chance of winning this.
I do. I I just think Dean's going to go to Alabama. It's so hard to pull linebackers from Mississippi and Alabama that want to go to Alabama. It's just we've seen it time and time again. Those guys want to go there. One thing I do see in the comments, Jace Garrett mentioned, and this has sort of become a popular thing. And there was a time when I felt this way about whether or not we want Hazelwood to come. He seems like kind of a diva. That kid loves football. The only time he came out yesterday, we're on 4th down when his team was punting.
Uh-huh.
And there was a time after the 58-yard kickoff return where he was literally exhausted, came out for one play, got some water, and went back in. That kid loves football. He loves to play. You might not like all the recruiting stuff that he has to deal with. You obviously might not like the statement he made with his shoes yesterday. But when that kid is in between the white lines, that kid is an absolute baller, beast, whatever adjective you want to use, and he is someone absolutely worth having in your class.
One more point about that. A lot of people have assumed that because Hazelwood, from a weight standpoint, is not he's not that heavy of a receiver, and he's a guy that likes to catch the football. Did you see evidence of physicality from Hazelwood yesterday?
I will actually, for those watching on video, which I believe are the only people still here
at this point in time, it's just video people.
Pull up something. You tell me right here if
All right,
this looks like
this.
a guy that likes to hit.
Here's Hazelwood. Oh, look at that. Yeah, there you go.
He loves the game of football. He loves to hit people.
How about Connor going video on cue? This is like a real show. That's amazing to me.
And again, there were times yesterday early on he only had, prior to his game-winning touchdown catch, he only had one catch on the day. But watching him yesterday, it was clear this guy is a special, game-changing, potentially program-defining player that is absolutely worth having in your class. I told you this before the show. If Georgia somehow doesn't land Jayden Hazelwood, it's a travesty. A full-blown travesty.
Amos Williams has an interesting take on Facebook. He says, B.A., you're making a lot of these people in here not like Hazelwood because you mention him 50 times a day on your show. Amos, I am totally aware that the most plugged-in people to the show are obviously the most prone to say, oh, that's too much of the Hazelwood talk. The further you get back, though, to the more casual Georgia fan or the more casual DawgNation Daily listener or viewer, not everyone consumes the show as rabidly as intensely as other people do. The farther you get away, the more casual fan, the more you can't do enough to satisfy their interest when it comes to Hazelwood. And it would be one thing if, in terms of the amount of time we spent talking about him over the course of the last few months, it'd be one thing if we just pulled some, young man's name at random and said, we're going to make this kid famous. There is a reason why we have focused on Hazelwood as much as we have. But, Amos, you should be aware that for the people that are watching right now, and if you're still watching now, you're, for the most part, a little bit more of a plugged-in Georgia fan, a little bit more of a plugged-in DawgNation Daily consumer. I'm obviously aware of the fact that y'all have heard a lot about him over the last few months. So, as always, I'm trying to do my part to kind of split the difference between both of the groups. By the way, Gene Tootle also had a really interesting comment. We were making Christmas present analogies earlier. Gene thinking about those, like, Lexus Season to Remember commercials. So if somebody's the Nintendo 64, who's the small Lexus key that comes in the box and you run over there and you see the car outside the window? That's a pretty good comparison.
I think Dean is that, but I also fundamentally have a lot of problems with those Lexus commercials in the sense that how are you going to buy a car for your loved one and not talk over the finances of that beforehand?
Yeah, but there's something kind of cool to think that one day you just look out the window. First of all, it's never snowing anywhere as much as it's snowing on Christmas in these commercials. with the fancy cars sitting outside there. I'd give anything if that was me one day. I absolutely love those commercials. All right, let's do a couple more. And we're going to get ready to get out of here. Nick Vernon, thank you so much for the kind words. Ken Feinberg says that Jayden Hazelwood is this way's Justin Fields. In a lot of ways, Ken's right about that. The comparison in terms of the attention we pay to them and the frustration that some of you have shown is very similar. If you want to go back to the very first year of DawgNation Daily, we talked about Demetrius Robertson in some form or fashion every day for weeks, and this is before the videos, just a podcast back then. But Robertson extended his recruitment beyond signing day. Many of you remember this. And we talked about him, every day. every day. And some of y'all, you didn't even know who I was back then, but you're about to strangle me for talking about Robertson so much. And as it turns out, maybe we did overblow that one just a little bit. But nonetheless, there's usually a reason why we talk about the guys that we end up talking about. K9 Blues on YouTube about cornerbacks, that the only true cornerback may be the JUCO transfer. Yeah, I mean, obviously DJ Daniel is a guy that Georgia thinks can play, but that's one of the reasons why Elam and Stevenson are such big names for Georgia. Christopher Rules kind of sums up this entire conversation by saying, just get everybody. And that's kind of where we all kind of eventually land on. We just got to get everybody, and that's what a lot of Georgia fans would like to see the Dogs do. C. Hill brings up a good example, and I've seen this one a lot this season. He says, I like the commercial where the guy buys a truck for himself and the SUV for his lady, and she thanks him for buying her the truck. Have you seen this one?
I've actually seen that commercial so many times that I've noticed. So at the beginning of the commercial, the lady, she gives him, I want to say, like a bottle opener or some other gift, and she gives her the black one, and she takes the red one. And then when they go out to the cars, she takes the black one, and he's left.
Oh, I haven't
with
seen the extended version.
I've seen that commercial a lot.
No,
it is a good one though.
Yeah, I've only seen like the end where like they run out there together. I haven't seen the extended version of the beginning of that, but I do like that commercial a lot though. All right, we got to go. Good stuff, y'all. We got Before the Hedge, just 3 p.m. today. There is a chance that Jeff's on the recruiting trail and joins us remotely. There's a chance he's in the studio. We don't know. We'll find out. We'll all find out together. It's that kind of time of year for Jeff when you never know where he's going to pop up and when he's going to pop up next, but he'll be all over the stories, much like he was yesterday. Read his piece about Jayden Hazelwood, getting quotes from Hazelwood at DawgNation.com today, by the way. Really good stuff there on that. We're back tomorrow. We got some fun and surprises in store for tomorrow's show. As we head towards the early signing period, we'll try to cover everything that's going on. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Podcast will be posted. Y'all can check that out. And as I said, back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Y'all have a great day, everybody.